sure to stay tuned for all the latest coverage on Hurricane Irma and the risks, not just from Florida, but into the southeast, coming up after the break.
The impacts here are imminent in the state of Florida.
This is a lot of rain, a lot of wind, but what's troubled me all week was a storm surge.
This hurricane coming, I am not going to stay here.
Winds are only going to get stronger from here on out.
If a hurricane comes here and takes this town out, it's going to be a financial disaster.
And good morning, everyone, from downtown Miami here. Again, this is where our coverage is starting today. We will not end up here, though. We are all shifting to the west, as we've seen, certainly, with the track of this system, the center point of that track. We're still in the cone, so we're still going to have issues, certainly here in Miami, and they've got everything pretty much hunkered down. It's been quiet for a couple of days now. I want to show you the port of Miami, and yesterday, two huge cruise ships out here. There's a Carnival cruise ship, and there was also a Royal Caribbean. Now, the Royal Caribbean Enchantment of the Seas actually took their employees. If their employees wanted to evacuate, they could get on the ship. They've taken them out to sea. They're going to get out of the harm's way of this thing, and then they'll come back after the storm passes on by. But that's the way to do it right, ladies and gentlemen. Great job there in using the ship as an evacuation. The other thing we've been worried about here are the cranes. I mean, the financial district, downtown Miami, is booming, okay? And scenes like this, like we have with this crane, are pretty much all over town. As a matter of fact, there's about 20 to 25 of these. And you can see this one, at least its tail, is butted up against the prevailing wind flow. In other words, the way you see that facing, the wind is blowing parallel with the top of that, which is good, because perpendicular obviously puts more force on that wind. But what we've got going on there yesterday, because I talked to somebody who actually operates cranes and puts these things up for a living, I said, why didn't you take them down? And he said, Jim, here's the deal with cranes. You can't just bring them down in a day or two. Once we get in the cone, even 5 or 7 days. It takes literally 2 weeks. It takes 10 days to bring these things down. The problem is, even though their threshold is 145 miles per hour, and we may only get 120 or even less here, the fact is when you go up in altitude, you get away from the friction of the ground, and you actually see an increase in the wind speed. So that is something we are still going to be worried about with these cranes here in Miami. Had a great talk with the governor this morning. He is in Tallahassee right now, again, pretty much buttoning up his state. The problem is like other systems in the past that may affect one area, he's certainly cautious in the fact that we can't have things pre-positioned in harm's way, and they're going to have to bring them in later because both sides of the state of Florida are going to be impacted by this regardless of where it comes in or where it may not come in. All right, I want to take you down to Key West because already today some of these outer bands have produced tropical storm winds, strong tropical storm winds. As a matter of fact, listen to this. So again, think about that. That's 60s and 70s, low 70s in terms of the gusts. Think about what happens when we get to 100 or 120 or 140 miles per hour. That is absolutely still a distinct possibility. Yes, the speed of the hurricane has come down, but it's still a Cat 4. And likely, very, very likely, we will deal with the worst hurricane landfall in the Keys since Donna in 1960. And I'm probably thinking not many. There'll probably be a few that remember Donna that actually lived in the Keys and that still do, but not many. Okay, and so that's what we're talking about, a stern warning from the National Weather Service in Key West to get out. You've still got time. We're talking about what could be a 12-foot surge. It was interesting. I was talking to Bill South, one of the senior forecasters down there on the Weather Channel this morning, and he was saying, Jim, I'm actually kind of shocked at the rainfall amounts we could be dealing with here. And you think about it, you don't really think about rainfall on an island, but accumulating freshwater rain and the fact that you'll have surge on the east side and then the west side, you've got all sorts of different ways to create storm surge issues. And speaking of that storm surge, that is now a bigger issue, certainly on the west side, and new areas have been asked to evacuate in Hillsborough and also into Charlotte County. I want to bring in meteorologist Carl Parker, who's got a chance to come in and certainly take a look at the situation. Carl, we saw this developing yesterday in terms of the track change. The big question is, when when does it end?
Yeah.
Could we still see a storm that's west of Tampa by the time all is said and done? I think that's still viable.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I think that's possible. Absolutely. I think it is possible that the core of the storm will move even farther to the west and remain just slightly offshore. Obviously, that would bring huge surge impacts all the way up the west coast of Florida. We think that is likely at this point. And when you're talking about the west coast of Florida, you've got such a shallow continental shelf that goes out for a very long way. If you've been to the beach there in Tampa and St. Pete, you can walk out for 100 or a couple of hundred yards easily because you've got such a shallow shelf there, and so in that situation you pile up the water even more easily. Let's take a look at the latest on the storm. It is now a 130-mile-per-hour storm, so this is something that we thought might happen because of the interaction with land with Cuba. We are seeing some degradation there in the western semicircle of the storm right through there, and that has weakened it slightly. Now, that doesn't mean that that weakening is going to hold because you've got a very long stretch of water here. You're talking about 90, 100 miles between Cuba and the Keys, so several hours for that core to be out over the open water, and there's really no reason to believe that it won't strengthen at that point because all of the other conditions are favorable, including very warm water. The core has been just devastating the northern part of Cuba. We got a report of winds gusting to 159 miles per hour there in northern Cuba. Our hearts going out to those folks there. And again, the storm is now going to begin to move more off to the northwest and towards the north, though there is some question about exactly where that turn will occur. And with all that time out over exceptionally warm water, it could very well be a strong Category 4 storm and maybe even Category 5 as it comes up towards the Keys over the next day or so. So there's a look at the forecast track, and you see that westward shift. Really, really important not to focus just on the cone here, as you'll feel impacts that are well outside of that cone there in South Florida. Not the core of the storm necessarily. You may escape the very worst of the storm in South Florida, but we think that that is going to come right up and across so many populated areas in southwest Florida, western Florida, and eventually into the central part of the state as well. And it is an enormous circulation. These tropical storm force winds extending out 200 miles from the center, and the hurricane force winds extending out 70 miles from the center. So a very, very large storm indeed. Let's get an update now on the storm from officials in Broward County in Florida.
The loss of life, and as your mayor, I'm very proud of the way our community has responded to this event and very encouraged based on the evacuations that residents are taking this storm seriously. They say that all disasters are local. In the spirit of community, I urge residents to reach out to neighbors or people that you think may be vulnerable and need assistance in completing final preparations and in a recovery effort. The Broward County Emergency Hotline is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to answer your questions. You can call 311 from within Broward or 954-831-4000. The hotline has assisted over 19,000 callers since Tuesday. Visit broward.org/hurricane or Twitter @ReadyBroward, or sign up for the Alert Broward text messaging system, and we will keep you apprised of everything that's going on with the storm. You can include us on Facebook at Broward EMD to keep current on our situation. With me today at the podium, I have Juliet Rulek from FPL, I have FEMA, and I have the EPA here, as well as the Broward Sheriff. We are working together very hard to ensure the safety of the Broward residents. At this time, I'm going to invite Juliet Rulek from FPL to say a few words.
Thank you, Mayor. As we are getting closer to the storm, anxieties are raising up. And I want to be here to assure you that FPL is doing all it can to assure that everything will be in place for a proper restoration. We have over 13,000 workers in place ready to respond and restore your power after the storm. Some of you are already experiencing outages, and that is going to be, as hard as it is to know, it is going to happen. Some of you may experience outages before the storm arrives fully, because the outer bands are starting to impact us with weather conditions. Please understand that that is expected, and we are doing everything we can to make sure we keep you advised. All of us are here to help. I myself will be riding and staying here at the EOC through the storm, and FPL will have a presence here so that we can give you as much updated information as possible. We know information is important to our customers, and we are here for you in that regard. Please remember to be safe. It is so important that you are all in your homes now and really trying to be safe. There are tips that we have given in the past that I would really like to remind you about. After the storm, please do not go near any standing water where there are power lines down. If you see a power line down, do not approach it. Please call the 1-800 number that was provided. And I ask you and implore you, please be safe. Thank you.
I would like to at this time invite our Broward Sheriff forward for a few remarks. Broward Sheriff.
Thank you, Mayor. Broward County, put simply, I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of this community. You've remained vigilant and resilient. We've driven the streets. Very few cars are out there. Citizens have taken evacuation warnings very seriously. Our shelters are starting to get full. You're listening and you're doing what needs to be done. I just want to go over a few things once the storm passes and we have the aftermath. As Juliet said, stay away from standing water and power lines. Call the 1-800 number. When you fire up those generators, make sure those generators are outside. They emit poisonous gases. They're colorless and odorless, and you won't know that, and somebody can, die from inhaling these gases. Very serious. Make sure the generators are outside. The Broward Sheriff's Office, we will continue to patrol the streets of Broward County until wind speeds reach 45 miles an hour. As I said before, at that time, we will recall our firefighters and we will recall our deputies. We will wait till the roads are drivable, and then we will begin answering 911 calls and calls for service. Take care of your neighbors, take care of each other. As the mayor said, do not drop your guard. This is a time to be more vigilant than ever. The storm did kick a little bit west, but we are going to get punched by this storm. Make sure you stay inside, and as I said yesterday, find the room in your home that's most safe, the one with no windows. Find that room and bring your entire family into that room when the wind speeds reach their highest and we're under hurricane, and we're actually getting hit by the hurricane. Do not return to your homes. Do not think once the storm passed that you're able to. There'll be trees down, there'll be power lines down, there'll be a plethora of things for public safety and government to deal with. Make sure you monitor social media, monitor the TV, monitor the radio, call the informational numbers. Make sure you do not return until it is safe to return, because we don't want accidents there. As a community, let's come together. We are going to have power outages. We are going to have property damage. Let's make sure our death toll stays at 0. Again, I'm very proud of Broward County. I'm very proud of the men and women of the Broward Sheriff's Office. Sworn, non-sworn, fire, detention, DLE. They've done an amazing job, and we will continue to do an amazing job. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. At this time, I just want to say that this has been a concerted, very, very collaborative team effort. On behalf of my colleagues at the Broward County Commission, I have Vice Mayor Beamfer with me today. I have Commissioner Michael Udine with me today. And all of my colleagues have been on the ground at shelters and in the communities, ensuring that people are transported to the shelters safely and ensuring that we have capacity for all the people who want to be sheltered. I can't thank Broward County enough for really collaborating and joining together to meet the needs of every resident in our community. I want to thank the community for listening to us, and I want to thank those who have evacuated safely, and for those who are still in areas that you may think are prone to flooding, I want you to consider right now evacuating to our shelter. This storm is going to hit us. It may not hit us as hard as we'd expected initially, but it still will hit us. And so I'm asking for your cooperation in that. We thank you, and at this time I'll conclude the press conference. Are there any questions?
Just a quick follow-up from earlier. The king-size mattress that was brought to you in a shelter, was that an actual mattress or an air mattress?
We've had both.
Are there any plans right now to open additional shelters?
As needed, on an as-needed basis.
That are open early in the southwest portion of the county, is that correct?
We are staffing our shelters with volunteers, and we're trying not to burn out our volunteers because we know we will need them post-storm. So we are opening shelters as needed based on population. Next.
Have there been any problems reported in any of the shelters so far?
Other than just oversized stuff. Refrigerators, the king-size mattress, blow-up mattresses, things that are just chairs, things that are too big to fit in the spaces that we've allotted per person. But everything else has been pretty orderly.
And right now you think you have sufficient space with the shelters that are currently open?
Yes, we believe we have sufficient space. We've actually got thousands of spaces open right now, and so as people come in and we feel the need, we'll open up more shelters. But remember,
I've got 2 shelters. How many thousands can they build?
We still have a capacity on the others.
All right,
and
Broward County officials there, the mayor of Broward County, county seat to Fort Lauderdale, reminding folks that they need to be very careful to shelter in place and get to a windowless interior room. Also be careful with generators, as that's certainly a cause for concern, the fumes from those generators. And also reminding folks that once winds get to tropical storm force to 40 miles per hour, public safety officers will then be recalled at that time, and that's going to be happening later this evening. We are awaiting a press conference from Florida Governor Rick Scott that's going to be coming up shortly here. There you see he's in Sarasota County in Florida, and this is the area that is one of the areas that's going to be hit very, very hard by the storm, which is not to say that South Florida is not going to get a lot of impact. They certainly will, but we think the core of the storm, the very worst of the storm, is going to be moving into southwest Florida. And let's take a look at when these tropical storm force winds are going to arrive. So once that happens, you want to be in your safe place. That is the time to be ready, and we think that that is going to be shortly here, coming up in the Keys, and then later this afternoon into Miami, and this evening up into Broward County, Palm Beach County, as well as towards Naples and Marco Island. Overnight, farther to the north towards Lake Okeechobee, and then into Sunday morning around Bradenton, Sarasota, over towards Titusville and Melbourne and Merritt Island there, and then going into late Sunday farther to the north, getting up into Orlando as well as into Leesburg and into the Villages. Already we're starting to get some very strong winds coming in. Got a report of winds gusting to 44 miles per hour in Miami. Winds have gusted as high as 66 miles per hour in the middle part of the Keys, and as these bands continue to drive in, we'll see very strong winds being driven down to the ground. Now, here is a computer model forecast. This is a high-resolution model. There may be some deviation from this track, but it can give you a good idea of how this is going to happen. And the one thing you notice is the very, very large wind field here. The winds extending 200 miles, tropical storm force winds extending 200 miles from the center. Let's take this forward. So we see the core of this storm coming in overnight tonight and into early tomorrow morning in the Keys. We are going to see devastation there. We will see a significant water level rise, and you still do have some time. Key West NWS reporting, tweeting this morning, you still do have some time to get out. We're getting really close as the tropical storm force winds are coming in now, but it's going to get so much worse as the core of that storm moves moves in. And then going through Sunday, we notice the core of the storm coming into southwest Florida, into Naples, into Fort Myers, Marco Island, Sanibel Island, all of those areas getting hit with the very strongest winds, well over 100 miles per hour, and a storm surge of 8 to 12 feet coming there into Naples and Fort Myers and Marco Island. Devastating impacts in southwest Florida, but also very strong wind coming into Miami and a very large area of onshore flow, which means a surge of 5 to 10 feet there for a lot of the east coast of Florida. Then we go into early Monday and we see this very strong onshore flow on the underside of the circulation coming into a lot of low-lying area there, Tampa, St. Pete, so a significant surge there. 3 to 5 is in the forecast now, but it may be raised. You also notice hurricane force winds in the north central part of the state, and then a tremendous flow of onshore wind coming up into North Florida, Georgia, and into South Carolina. So again, Jim, we're talking about an enormous circulation where certainly the core is going to have the greatest impact, but the entire state is going to be affected by the storm as it comes up and across the north. Let's get out to Jim Cantore. He's in Miami right now, and Jim, certainly it's a little bit better for South Florida, but we're not talking about a small storm here. We're talking about an enormous storm.
So, Carl, I'm trying to think back to storms that Miami can relate to of near term. Probably like Katrina a little bit, in the fact that you had a developing hurricane that came into Broward County and then curled down into the Keys. Probably similar weather with that here, if you will, in Miami. And also, I want you to think of Wilma, which came in from the other side in the same season, 2005, from the western side with a big wind field. We had gusts up to 120 miles per hour. So they may not be that high, but they'll be something. Now, for the last 5 minutes, we've unleashed about a tropical storm wind here, okay? At least in gusts. And look at what it's done to the Miami River here and Biscayne Bay. I mean, we got white caps out here as far as you can see. So this is pretty tremendous. And remember, the storm is still down, basically kissing Cuba. All right, it's a long way away. So that's over, well over 200 miles, maybe almost 300 miles away from us right now in terms of what we got. So that is a big deal, guys, in what we're seeing here, I think, in terms of the wind field. So it's pretty spread out. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Yes, as Carl said, we don't expect the conditions to be as bad as they could have been yesterday, certainly with where the cone was. But everything is shifted now, and it's game on in Naples. It's game on in Fort Myers, Punta Gorda, Charlotte, Port Charlotte, I should say, Sarasota, Bradenton, even toward Tampa. And if I'm in Tampa, I was just doing a Facebook Live with my producer, Steve Pederak. I'm not taking my eyes off this thing. Because if you remember with Charlie, these things sometimes have a little bit of a mind of their own. And for every little jog this way or that way makes all the difference in the world and where it may eventually even wind up. And Carl Parker, you know as well as I do, the longer parts of this stay over water, we know eventually it goes into the northern Gulf and comes on shore, but the longer the wind field could stay up. So for cities like Birmingham, Atlanta, Montgomery, Macon, your wind potential goes up with the longer term this stays offshore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Jim. And so, we've been looking at a model showing the core of the storm, showing it partially onshore and partially offshore, so still drawing energy from very warm water in the Gulf of Mexico. But yes, if the core were to stay a little more offshore, here's the model forecast showing you this RPM model. You see it's right along the coast there. That's Monday morning. If it's just a little bit farther offshore, then it stays stronger longer. And as it stands, Jim, we're going to be talking about winds that will be very strong coming up into South Georgia. There we go, into Monday afternoon. And in fact, I don't know if you saw this, Jim, but looking at the European model, which, by the way, has done a real bang-up job. It's just been the best model of all, hands down, in this event. And when you look at the European model wind gust forecast in North Georgia, it's actually showing winds gusting to 70 and 80 and close to 90 miles per hour in North Georgia, in the Atlanta metro area. And so this could be a formidable storm. We won't see sustained winds anywhere near that, but where we get some heavier bands of storms with all that strong wind and all that velocity and momentum aloft that can be transferred down to the ground, and we could be talking about winds that could easily knock down a lot of trees and cause a lot of power outages across much of the state of Georgia and also into South Carolina, Jim.
Yeah, so think of Opal. And maybe even worse if that comes to fruition. Carl, here's I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to have Safer zoom in on it. This is Maui's page. Okay, this is the forecast wind by the European model with it still coming into Naples, Fort Myers for the Tampa area. These are the forecast gusts. So these aren't going to be sustained winds. These are forecast gusts. And you can see well over 100 miles an hour here. I mean, 115, 125, just tremendous wind here in the Tampa Bay area. And that is some wind that they haven't seen in ages. I'm going to have him pull out here. But that's incredible. And you're talking about all along the west coast of Florida. So this is, if this verifies, this is a massive amount of damage. A massive amount of damage. And if you live in a mobile home, if you don't live in a safe structure, you could easily be compromised there with those kind of wind gusts. Now, I'm not saying that's going to verify, okay? But that's what we're seeing from some of the guidance in the Weather Service. Wind gusts over 100 miles an hour, even in toward Tampa Bay. So this is with a storm that, with the European, comes in around Naples and Fort Myers. So even with it getting a chance to wind down a little bit, you're still seeing wind gusts in excess of 100. So this is so dangerous. And what I don't want people to do, Carl, because we've gone from 150 to 130, think, oh, we don't have to worry about it now. You're still in the Cat 4 range, and you're still up there in severe wind damage. And like, if the picture you paint for Birmingham and Atlanta and northern Georgia comes to fruition, I mean, wow, I can't even imagine the dollar value to this. I really can't. I can't.
Yeah, Jim, this is going to be a devastating storm. You know, for so long we were thinking about the fact that it might move into the eastern part of the state, that core of the storm, and now it appears solidly. All the model guidance is now converging on this point about the idea of the core of the storm coming right up across the southwest part of the state, and it's so different as compared to recent storms. You look at Charlie, and it had a very small, what's called a radius of maximum wind. It was only about 7 miles, that area of strongest wind, whereas the average is closer to 25 to 30 miles, and in this case it's even larger than that. The hurricane force winds extending out 70 miles. So you're talking about this swath of intense wind damage starting there in the Keys, coming up through Naples and right up through Fort Myers into Port Charlotte, into Sarasota, into Bradenton, into Tampa, St. Pete, and up into the central part of the state, and then right up 75 beyond that. It's not going to slow down. These systems have a lot of what is called inertial stability, and they don't just stop once they get over land, even though you've removed that fuel source. It takes a long time for that to happen, and oftentimes you see the wind field actually expanding, and then the gusts get stronger even as that sustained wind starts to come down, Jim.
And Carl, to that point, we've got such a deep low pressure here.
Yeah.
As we get it up to the north, now you've got this large gradient wind field that, like you said, has expanded. So even if we don't get 90 in Atlanta or in Birmingham or in northern Georgia, perhaps as far north as Huntsville, Chattanooga, even if you get several hours of 55, 60, that wind's going to come in from different directions, and it's going to just tug and pull the trees. We saw a lot of that with Opal, and there was a tremendous amount of wind damage, even as the storm weakened. And the other thing too, Carl, is, you know, if this storm decides to ramp up and then come in, the farther north and west it comes in, the longer it's going to take to come down. So I think it's a very real probability, the picture you paint for parts of Alabama and Georgia in terms of the potential wind damage there, and really what is going to be Cat 1, maybe even Cat 2 winds. Up around I-20.
That's right. This is going to be a long duration event and a very widespread event, and I think we're going to see widespread tree damage and power outages, as you mentioned. It's going to be a very serious storm for a large part of the southeast. Now, another thing I wanted to mention, Jim, is the surge potential here, because the surge potential is so high there along the west coast of Florida. What we're looking at here is the continental shelf, and you can see this very shallow shelf that extends well offshore, and I'm sure you know this, Jim. If you go to the beach there in Southwest Florida, you can walk out, I mean, you know, a football field, a couple of football fields, and the water is still not over your head, and so it just allows the water to be piled up that much more easily. And then another thing that we see are something called coastally trapped Kelvin waves, where you get these waves that emanate from the circulation and come out and towards the coast, and that also raises that surge potential. We've seen that with a number of storms coming into the west coast of Florida. So that's going to mean that we may see an even higher surge than what is forecast right now. You've got this tremendous surge here in southwest Florida right now, 5 to 10 feet from Miami down through the Keys, 8 to 12 there into Naples and Marco Island. You look at Marco Island, I mean, that means that those beautiful homes there are just going to be completely inundated by high water, along with the wave action that comes with that. And then you've got 5 to 8 as you get up towards Sarasota and Bradenton. And right now we've got 3 to 5 in Tampa. But again, you've got that really shallow shelf. And with the storm being this powerful and taking that track that's right along the coast, that's going to drive an awful lot of water in there. And some of the surge modeling suggesting that it may be higher than that in Tampa and St. Pete. So this could really be significant surge there, Jim, getting up into the bay there and right along the coast.
Carl, we really haven't seen a storm of this size with this, if you will, Donna Charlie type trajectory in years.
That's right.
So, you know, areas that haven't been tested are going to be tested in through here. And what I think makes the recovery so difficult, and I know that I'm asking for patience even before the event happens, but you can't really just put the recovery effort in harm's way. You have to make sure that's out of harm's way, and then you can get in. But if we have the type of destruction that we're going to see, remember, you've got to remove the trees, you've got to remove the old poles, you've got to get the lines down, and then you can start putting it up. And granted, we have literally armies of that waiting to come in, but it may take some time. And already before this event starts, I need to ask for all y'all's patience, especially ones that have had to evacuate and know that you're in potentially the worst of this. A little bit of a breather here, certainly on the east side with this western shift, but because it's so big, that's why we still have hurricane warnings all the way up to Cape Canaveral, because we're going to get hurricane conditions. Will they be eye wall conditions on the east side? Probably not. But still, 80, 90 miles an hour, gusts to 100, can do a lot of damage. And especially because it's so big, Carl, it's going to take a while for those gusts to wind down.